Welcome to the Mayo Clinic Ophthalmology Podcast, brought to you by Mayo Clinic. I'm your co-host, Dr. Brittany Scruggs.
And I'm your co-host, Dr. Eric Bothan. We are here to bring you the latest and greatest in ophthalmology, medicine, and more.
Today we are joined with our Mayo Clinic Department Optician, Mr. Brady Kaupa. Tune in to hear about everything you might ask when prescribing new glasses.
In today's episode, we are excited to dive into the world of an optician. Ophthalmologists, optometrists, and our care team strive to measure the optical needs of our patients. Understanding how to best write the prescription that follows is a critical piece in our patient care. To help inform us on this teamwork, we are chatting with one of our very own Mayo Clinic optical dispensing experts, Mr. Brady Kaupa. We hope to bring optical clarity on topics from tint to transitions and protection to 3D printing. Welcome,
Thank you.
Mr. Kaupa.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So thank you for helping us take care of patients.
Of course.
Right? We were talking before this episode that, a lot of patients ask a lot of questions and we are not the experts in this. So I think we both are really looking forward to learning. But before we get into your optical expertise, can you just share with us your journey? How did you become an optician?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's kind of funny. I started as an optician when I was 18 years old. I'm 27 now, about to be 28, so I've been doing this for almost 10 years. I originally, when I was in high school, was working at Rogan Shoes here in town selling shoes. And my mom was an optician for a long time, about 20, 25 years. And I had graduated high school, wasn't really quite sure what I wanted to do yet. My mom suggested, hey, you seems like something that you'd be good at. You really like talking to people, helping them solve their problems. And that's essentially what I've been doing now for the last 10 years. And it's been a blast.
When we had this idea to just gather more information on all the optical questions we have and share that with our audience, your name came up, and very quickly in sitting down with you, I appreciated your passion and your communication style. I understand you've done podcasting before. That's
Absolutely.
For what topic was that?
History. I study history in college now, so.
So you certainly already have comfort behind the mic, and so we're excited about that. But share with us, I experienced your passion and interest expressed through our conversation in advance of this podcast. But share with our listeners what drives you, excites you, and just inspires you being an optician.
Yeah, I think I can say it pretty simply, and honestly, it's just helping people. That's my favorite part of my job every day. I don't see myself as somebody who is merely trying to sell you eyeglasses. I see myself as the last person in your ophthalmology experience. You see your technicians, you even speak to a scheduler before you come in. You see your provider who helps you out with your examination or your procedure, and I'm just the last step on that. So once you come into me, you've already gone through most of the experience trying to figure out what issues you may be having with your vision, and then it's my job to try to help you finish out that loop so that you've had a good experience. And
so what are the main questions, concerns, complaints that you get at the very end of the ophthalmology experience? What are you hearing?
I think it's interesting because I've worked at quite a few different practices before. Before I was with Mayo, I've been here for about 4 years. I worked at a practice in Arizona where I was considered an apprentice optician for 3 years. And I think that the type of practice that we have here at Mayo Clinic brings different challenges and different questions than maybe a standard practice that you would have like a walk-in appointment to. The big thing that I see here is that we have a lot of patients who have very complex issues and maybe issues that affect different parts of their bodies that may also be affecting their vision. Versus a traditional walk-in clinic, you may just have somebody who's saying, oh, I'm 40 years old, I just woke up and I can't read anymore. Well, you might need some reading glasses. Versus here you have a patient who maybe has something like diabetes, who struggles with their vision in many different aspects. And so I think that what makes it more complicated is just that the average case that we see here isn't the average case that everybody sees. So it's more complicated in that respect, but I think it makes it more exciting to try to find options that will help them with their problems, where people may not have been able to do that before.
So I find it just already interesting that so often when I write a prescription, I put sort of the bare bones of what I think needs to be on the prescription, the refraction, the add power, whether there's a prism for my strabismus patients. You're already highlighting something which I maybe haven't overlooked, which is what information would help you about the patient as you meet them and engage them Are physicians putting enough in there to describe the patient experience or our exam to equip you? Like, if you ask for things like, what would a physician write down that would help you in advance of just talking to the patients besides the numbers? What would that be?
That's interesting because for me specifically, when I sit down with a patient, the first thing that I do is I pull up their chart. The things that I look for is maybe, has this patient had chronic dry eye issues? Maybe do they have cataracts that they have either neglected to take care of or that aren't quite ready to be taken care of yet? Those sorts of things, when I pull up a chart and I'm given a prescription, gives me a better idea of what a patient may be experiencing. Oftentimes here we see patients who have things like glaucoma, macular degeneration and such, where the expectation that the patient might have for their vision may be different than what is realistic based on the conditions that they may be struggling with. Things like that would be very helpful. Like I said, it's the first thing I do when I sit down with somebody. I want to know as much as possible. I look at that problem list because that tells me about everything that I need to know.
So, but writing a narrative, say, prefers left eye, or very interested in, their quilting experience, optics, or deformed left ear, and the bridge bends the ear down whenever I prescribe. Do people typically put little narratives in like that, or not enough?
Generally, no. No, the big things that we see is, which we'll talk about later, things like specialty tints. Or if a patient has just had a procedure like a cataract surgery. That stuff we'll see on there, but generally no, not even just here at Mayo, but oftentimes those are questions that as opticians we are trained to kind of speak with the patient more about those issues that they may be having, versus a practice like Mayo Clinic, I can pull up their chart and have access to everything. Rather than a traditional walk-in practice where you're really stuck with just what the doctor may have spoken about with the patient. Other things, maybe visual acuity. That's another thing that all of us in the optical shop really love to look at. When you walk in with that new prescription, and I see in the encounter notes, well, with this new prescription, we're able to get a patient to 20/20 or 20/40 up close. Those things can be very helpful for us. Is when a patient comes back a couple weeks later after they've received their eyeglasses and they're wondering why their near vision isn't quite at 20/20, and we see that, well, maybe that prescription we corrected you to 20/30. That kind of stuff would be really helpful for us.
So regarding the handoff, what is the ideal handoff and what is a confusing handoff? And specifically, what is like a common thing that's missing that you're like, I wish that ophthalmologists and optometrists knew that we struggle with this often?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because, again, I think just the style of practice that we have here at Mayo Clinic and other large providers, it's the fact that so many different people are working with one patient. Where I was working before Mayo, I was the technician, I was the optician, I was the person helping the patient fill out their paperwork before they saw the doctor. So I already had most of the background. So I really liked it when our providers would kind of give us a rundown while the patient was standing there with them. Say, hey, Brady, this is kind of what we found with the exam today. This is what the patient is hoping to get out of their new eyeglasses. This is maybe some concerns that they have. And that seemed to be really smooth because the patient could hear you speaking about the issues that they just directly spoke about with you in the exam room, which tells them that you were listening to them the whole time that you were back there. They're more confident in that. And then when I'm able to react to those things that you bring up to me as the provider or the technician, that kind of gives them a sense that they are really being taken care of, and it helps them maybe correct some misunderstandings that might happen in that transfer of information. So if you say, oh, well, the patient was really struggling with their right eye, and they go, oh, actually, it was the left. Stuff like that is definitely really helpful for us to know before we even sit down with the patient and discuss eyeglass frames and lenses and all those fun things.
On that note, when you think about what's the history and what are we missing, one of my biggest, I think for many ophthalmologists, these moments in clinic where they pull out 11 pair of glasses and none of them are perfect. And they're there seeking perfection, quality of life with all these tools that haven't been. Is there anything for the patient that has a laundry list and a bag full of glasses that we could help support you or communicate with the patient ahead of time in a better way? I know our reaction when they take out 11 pairs of glasses.
Deep, heavy sigh.
What's yours, and how can we help bridge that gap?
Depending on the context, I probably have a deep, heavy sigh as well. Kind of the same thing, just knowing what the patient expects is really important. When I see a patient who has 11 pairs of glasses and they're not happy with any of them, the first thing that I think of is, what do they expect? The thing that I tell patients oftentimes with like new presbyopes often is they come in with this new prescription and they have an ad power and they're like, this is going to fix all my problems. What are my options? And the first thing that I tell them is that there is no perfect option necessarily, depending on what you're looking for. Every option that we can give to you has its downsides and has its plus sides. Progressive lenses, obviously, they have a narrow field of vision where some people kind of struggle with that versus line bifocals don't, but then you don't have that intermediate computer area on a line bifocal. So knowing what the patient expects would be really important because that helps me address those issues and it gives me a little bit more time to think about what I might suggest for the patient.
Can we talk about that for a second?
Yeah.
So progressive lenses are very expensive.
Yes.
I know, I'm wearing them on my face right now. And some people come back after 2 or 3 weeks and they're like, I gave it a valiant effort. It's not working for me.
Yeah.
Right. That person just is not ever going to be able to do well with progressives. So there are lots of options. As you said, we have bifocals and trifocals, executive bifocal. We have the progressive lenses. So how do you tell if a patient's going to do well with one versus the other than just using words and saying this is what the lens looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of lens options, you brought up executive bifocals, blended bifocals and such. It's interesting. I feel like a couple years ago, we used to do things like executive bifocals more often. It's pretty hard nowadays to get a hold of those types of multifocal lenses. Even extended bifocals like the wider corridor. Generally for a line bifocal, we think of a 28 millimeter bifocal. That area, the widest point is 28 millimeters. They used to have an option like a 35 millimeter or 45 millimeter, which we would usually use for maybe more elderly patients who need that extra help up close. Then you have something like an executive bifocal where the multifocal line splits across the entire width of the lens. Like I said, those aren't available quite as much anymore. It's pretty hard to get a hold of them. Line multifocal options are something that we just don't use quite as often. Progressive is really the standard of where lenses are going. Even single vision, we have options now called Eisen lenses, digital single vision lenses that kind of, we call it a regressive ad instead of a progressive ad, where for somebody who's maybe a higher myope like myself, I'm a -3. It takes away a little bit of that spherical power towards the bottom edges of the lenses. And I'm a student as well, so I spend a lot of time reading. So for me, obviously, I have had to get used to over time holding my material a little bit further away because I have that stronger distance prescription. Cuts down on a little bit of that. So we have the option now to kind of prep people for progressive lenses with options like that too. So I think that that's really where the lens technology is going from here. It's going to be all progressive. We do have blended bifocal options. I've used those recently for children. It works really well. They don't see those bifocal lines. Kids oftentimes do really well with progressive lenses, but there are some situations where I just wouldn't recommend progressives for patients. So there's
Well, what would those
all kinds
be?
of things. So the biggest one that we see is maybe patients who have balance issues,
Okay.
vision in one eye, or people who have any kind of condition that may affect their peripheral vision, their depth perception. There was a research study that I actually sent out that I had read earlier, and I don't have it up in front of me, but progressive lens wearers are significantly more likely to suffer a severe fall than people who wear either traditional line multifocal lenses or single vision lenses. So that's the biggest thing that we see in the optical
So anyone
shop.
at risk of falling really shouldn't have progressives.
Exactly.
So where you a blended bifocal, you have a bigger bifocal zone, they just blend the transition line or the transition zone?
Sometimes. With the bifocals that we use here through the optical shop at Mayo Clinic, it's a smaller rounded bifocal, which works quite well. But they do have options for blended bifocals that are a little bit larger for those reasons. But yeah.
So it sounds like you do a lot of counseling. Like you
Yes.
sit down, you look at the face and the ears and
Yes.
the nose, and you counsel about lenses and what the pros and the cons are. That's great. How about online?
Yeah.
How do patients get glasses online and have the same experience, or do you say that online is just not equal?
It's interesting. So I ask people when they tell me that they've gotten their glasses online. Oftentimes when somebody has had online glasses and then they see me, it's because they've had an issue with them, whether it's a fitment or just they're not happy with the quality of lenses. There's some kind of issue that they're having. But I will say nowadays, the technology works fairly well for certain people. I generally say if you're from a +2 to a -2 single vision lenses, you don't have a lot of astigmatism, you don't have prism. I haven't seen any online retailers who will do prism in eyeglasses for online purchase. So I generally would tell those people that I would say I wouldn't recommend online. People who wear progressive lenses, I know you either love them or you hate them.
Yeah.
You've had a good experience online or you've had a bad experience. The big thing that I struggle with the online glasses is that you don't necessarily know if the laboratories that are producing those lenses are following the same manufacturing guidelines that have to be followed here in the United States. So that would be my biggest concern. It's things like the actual minimum thickness of the lenses to ensure that they are shatter resistant and such. We see patients from all over the place here at Mayo, and I've met quite a few from Hong Kong specifically, where they do a lot of eyeglasses, and they make some incredibly thin high index lenses. And that's the first thing that I worry about.
So the safety profile is dropping off.
Exactly.
Potentially.
Exactly. The thinner you make those lenses, the more prone to shatter that they are. So, yeah, complicated prescriptions, I say probably don't go online.
Let's talk about other design options. So we've talked about ad options and different roles. Let's talk about tint, and if we can. For me, my two questions coming in that jumped up was prescribing tint for light-sensitive patients.
Yes.
And Brittany, you're an expert with patients with inherited retinal diseases. Some of them are very light-sensitive. I know we have tints and color. It jumps into the FL41 type lenses. When you have patients in front of you that are very light sensitive, how do you walk them through either a color choice or a tint, and when do you ramp up to the more robust tint options?
Yeah, so FL41 generally is one that we use here quite a bit at Mayo Clinic. I had not used it previously before starting with Mayo, so that's one that we use most often. But to answer your question about choosing tints, the easiest way I found to do that is to put the tint in front of a patient's eyes. Obviously, one thing that I tell patients when I'm showing them FL41 specifically is that you're not going to know if it's helping to reduce your symptoms immediately. It's going to take some time. But if you can show somebody a lens tint and they can see for themselves that it's reducing those symptoms, the glare that they're noticing, that is the easiest way I have found. And that's even from a retail side as well. Just choosing a sunglass. You ask people who wear prescription sunglasses, they'll tell you what their favorite color is. But that's because they've taken that time to try all the different options and see what they like. So that would be the biggest thing for me, is I love just putting that lens in front of a patient, letting them see for themselves if it works or not.
And the light sensitivity, especially with my patients who have inherited retinal diseases, it's very different inside versus outdoors. So to do a tinting evaluation, I mean, you really need to take the patient outside, right?
Exactly.
So what is standard?
Yeah, so I would say that most of the time for those severe light sensitive patients, it would be that FL41 generally is what we're using. If you're not quite at that point yet, or if it hasn't been prescribed by a provider, light sensitive patient, I usually think of amber colors, browns, things like that. I myself am very light sensitive, but not because of any specific medical condition. I find that people with lighter colored eyes usually have a little bit more of a struggle with those bright lights, so I prefer very dark gray lenses. It's one of those things, you ask 20 different opticians, they're going to tell you, I like a gray shade number 2 versus a gray shade number 3. But yeah,
you learn on that.
Ambers, FL41, those are the ones that we use the most.
Okay, what about blue light blocking? I feel like every time I go get glasses, they're saying, "Oh, yes," and the blue light blocking is there, and I wonder why. I mean, in my concept of care, there is a certain percentage of the population that is sensitive to different things, whether it's fluorescent lights or blue lights. Maybe it keeps them up at night, but a large percentage of the population doesn't need it.
Yeah.
How much has the industry kind of just gone to putting it in automatically? And how important is it to have that discussion when you get glasses prescribed?
That's interesting, because that's another question that I used to get asked more often a couple years ago. I think that blue light filtering lenses and coatings and such are so standard now that people don't really ask about it as often. But 3 or 4 years ago, it was kind of the hot new thing that everybody was talking about. To my knowledge, from everything that I've looked up over the last couple years, that blue light filtering lenses generally filter about 20 to 30% of oncoming blue light. And they haven't been found to significantly reduce symptoms that patients might be experiencing with blue light. I tell patients that if you walk outside in the bright sun, even with a blue light filtering lens, you're going to get far more blue light from the sun than you would generally from looking at a cell phone. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things that we have it as an option. I don't tell patients directly that it's like you have to have it if you're having X or Y problems with your lenses. I wear it because I find that it does help me with, as I stare at a computer screen for 12 hours a day.
Decreases fatigue for you?
Yeah. And a lot of the newer blue light filtering lenses are coming with tinting on them as well. Like those Eisen lenses that I was talking about earlier, the digital lenses will have a very slight, almost like a half of a level of yellow tinting on the lenses. And I think that I've found that the tinting itself, a very minimal yellow tint with a standard anti-glare coating, reduces that fatigue that I get from the computer more than a standard lens just with a blue light filter built into it.
Yeah. Can you help us when we're requesting protective glasses?
Yes.
What are the options and what are the pros and cons of each?
Absolutely. So we do that a lot here through Mayo, not necessarily that have been prescribed by Mayo providers, but we deal with a lot of Mayo employees who go through their safety eyeglasses, dozens a day. And generally, the standard lens that we use for those patients is polycarbonate. Impact resistance, it has chemical resistance, shatter resistant. In terms of lens quality, its Abe value speaks about how much light a lens material is able to disperse through the medium, which determines the optical quality of that lens. It's not on the higher end. Polycarbonate's kind of in the middle of the pack. Your glass is your highest. Obviously, glass not going to be safe to use for a protective lens. Your high indexes are going to be on the high end. CR39 plastic, your standard plastic, is going to be up there. So it's not the best in terms of optical quality. I find that most patients can't tell the difference between that higher Abe value versus a lower. If you have somebody who has struggled with a lot of vision issues, they may notice those slight changes in their vision more than the average person off the street. So polycarbonate is generally what we recommend for safety material. High index lenses, the thing that we found with those, and I've spoken to our lab about this with safety glasses, is that oftentimes to make those lenses thick enough that they are shatter resistant, you end up finding that those lenses end up becoming more bulky and thicker than a polycarbonate material for somebody in a higher power that you normally wouldn't recommend that for. So it's kind of interesting how that works with all of the safety standards that we deal with in eyeglasses.
All right, my turn. I have one question regarding the optical defocus lenses. So for those that don't care for children, there's a variety of ongoing research and care globally on how to avoid or mute the normal myopic shift through the juvenile years. I think in conditions like you manage, Brittany, some of the high pathological myopes aren't generally thought to be as responsive, but the bread and butter genetic myopia, atropine's not been on our options to try to change myopic growth. But now, as of recently, FDA approved, the Elisar Stellus lenses, and then there's others that that are coming, both potentially here to Mayo, but all across the country in optics. Share with us how often that conversation's coming up, how often we're starting to see prescriptions, because now as we're trying to help our children not get as myopic, it's a new option. And then with that, what kind of discussions and what type of cost are you understanding is happening out there for families that are having these lenses prescribed?
That's interesting. I actually, up until very recently, hadn't had really anybody asking about the myopic lenses. And that's a conversation that I've had more recently. Funny enough, with a lot of our Mayo providers from Wisconsin have been calling over and asking about those lenses. And to show up for the podcast, I actually spoke with our lab about these lens options and asking them what they think about pricing options and availability. Because from my understanding, the lens technology itself is that there's kinds of aspheric rings that are built into the lenses, which direct the eye towards a central channel to help reduce that myopic progression inside of the lens. And so that technology is really new yet. So I haven't had a whole lot of time to experience it. And I'm really interested to see how well it works for patients. in terms of what we're hearing here through Mayo Clinic, is that generally the large lens manufacturers, they hold on to their patents, and with something so new like this, it's not going to be generally available to independent laboratories like we use through Mayo Clinic for some time. I'm hoping, and our laboratory representatives say by the end of the year, they're hoping that we can have that available to our patients. I haven't had anyone prescribe it yet, but I'm expecting that in the coming months that we'll see that more often. I think that it's just so new that people don't really know that it's an option for patients yet. So by the end of this year, I think it's going to be something that we hear a lot more about.
It's historically, patients would come in with myopia, and it was a quick patient visit, in and out. In the last years, the walking them through a discussion of atropine made it a longer discussion, and now having another one. One of our own providers here at Mayo has a family member now in the Stellus lenses, and it's one of these things I think we're going to learn about both in research and clinical care. For listeners that are considering those, my understanding in the peds ophthalmology discussions is they really can't tell a difference when you look at the glasses. The patient reports of concerns about wear are really not much of a concern. They've been well tolerated. I think as a research community, we're going to continue to learn about how much it curbs myopia and hopefully reduces complications from myopia. But that is a whole nother level of down the road insights we'll have. But yeah, we're looking forward to having them provided.
Right, we've had the MySight contact lens,
correct.
But anyone who's had an 8-year-old knows that they're gross, right? And contact lenses in children, we do our best. But if we have a glass that can do the same thing, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I'm really excited for more of that information to come out too, and I'm hoping that when they become more available to us at the optical shop, we'll even see maybe our own research team hopefully get some of their patients' hands on those and see how they work. So I think it'll be really fun to see how that goes.
Yeah. I have a question about frames.
Yeah.
So a common complaint that we get is I broke my frames. I'm wearing my old glasses because I broke my frames. I stepped on them, whatever it is. What complaints do you hear? How can patients potentially avoid that? What are some frame issues that you deal with?
That's really interesting because we see patients from all over the planet. And anybody who comes to Mayo Clinic who has issues with their glasses, they find their way up to us on Mayo 7. So the most common issues that I see is generally, unfortunately, fall damage. And that's one where you see pretty traumatic damage not only to the patient, but to their eyeglasses. General maintenance and such to eyeglasses, obviously, we tell people this all the time. You take your glasses off with 2 hands. You don't pull them off with one. You're going to pull the arms off the frames. Stuff like that is fairly common, but what we see most often here is kind of forceful impact damage to the frames, whether it's the patient has fallen, or I hear this more often in the springtime. I don't know if it's people doing their spring cleaning, but boxes, things falling and hitting somebody in the face and damaging their frames from there. Those are the most common.
What's the normal optical insurance policy? I mean, I know it's maybe different with kids in some settings, but if you buy glasses at a typical optical, do you get one breakage replacement, or do you get one optical change within 3 months, or what's the normal? We got your back on the optics these days.
That's really interesting because more of a clinical setting like here at Mayo Clinic, I feel like those options that patients have if they are having problems are much more generous than what you see other places. Here, especially with our prescription remakes, which we use quite often, it's extremely generous. We use 6 months here at Mayo Clinic if you're having an issue with your prescription. Most of the industry, it's anywhere from 30 to 90 days, usually closer to 60. Most places I know as well, it's hard to say. The manufacturers will warranty their products. Generally, if it looks like damage that could have been caused because of the manufacturing of the eyeglass frame or of the lenses, they're more likely to give those things back to the patients and take care of them that way. I find, at least here, that through our independent laboratory, they're much more lenient on those things if there are damage to the frames or lenses. Here we do a year that you can have maintenance done on your frames and lenses, and we provide lifetime care to the eyeglasses as well at no charge. So we see patients from all over who maybe they're here from another state and they're just having problems. They broke their glasses. We'll do our best to fix those up for the patient or do any routine maintenance. If somebody just stops by and they're looking at frames while they're waiting to see you for their appointment, they go, oh, I'm just staring at the board, and I look at their glasses and I see they're either crooked or something needs to be replaced. That's stuff that we do all the time in the optical shop. We'll bring somebody back and just take care of them as much as we can, even if they're not a patient with us specifically.
On the frame topic, and if breakage and you getting them, it was so often when some of these frames come in, and especially in my practice with pediatrics, craniofacial syndromes, optical fitting is a challenge.
Yes.
In many patients. I know different locations around the country have 3D printing option. They'll model the child's head and come up with unique, for children that don't have ears or abnormal nose structure. Share with us just how, as a community, optical community, how accessible are they? What advice they have for people that are not maybe here at Mayo, but have an optical situation that never seems to fit very well.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I would say generally for pediatric patients, that's a problem that's more so been solved more recently than I think more adult patients. For our pediatrics here at Mayo, at least, we have many different styles of frames that you can choose from, especially if there are specific issues that the patient might be having. We have frames that don't necessarily have temples on the sides, but have full straps. So really the only part of the frame that rests on the patient's face is a nose bridge, which can be adjusted either smaller or larger. We can add nose pads, things like that. So for the pediatrics, I think it's much less of a problem now than it used to be. 3D printed frames, it's really interesting. So a couple years ago, we had been kind of speaking with different people about the possibility of 3D printed frames. The technology is really moving quite quickly. I remember even 10 years ago, the idea of 3D printing things was like this, who's even doing that? But nowadays you can have a $300 3D printer and set it on your desk and print a keychain at home. So it's been really fun seeing how that technology has progressed with 3D printed eyeglasses. A lot of companies have already done really good customization in terms of like temple lengths and bridge lengths for people who need that. The problem that we've seen is that the material that they use for 3D printing really isn't quite where we want it to be in terms of giving a patient a product which we know will last and that we are comfortable with giving them. So that's kind of where it's at right now. The technology is there in terms of being able to produce it. It's just refining it, I think, is where we're still waiting.
Okay, I have a question that's for patients, but also for myself.
Yeah.
So I wear glasses every day, and I'm at the slit lamp, and they touch the microscope, or I'm operating, and I'm touching the microscope. I have wasted so many pairs of glasses just because they get two dots right where my pupils are, essentially, just because they constantly are touching microscopes. But then you also see patients, and they're wearing these glasses. They're like, it's not good quality. Yeah, they're all scratched up.
Yeah.
So talk us through quality control, but also like what you can put on the glasses to make them last longer, scratch resistant, all the different options.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that I talk about with people every day. Before I came here to record this with you guys today, I was having a conversation with a patient who was kind of struggling with their eyeglasses being all damaged. And that is something that I don't think will ever go away completely, unfortunately. Humans, we do a lot of things, and our lenses, the softer they get, the thinner they get. I tell people they're more scratch prone. The softer, the lighter, the thinner. It just tends to happen. And in terms of, for you specifically, I would say that with your materials, you want to get something that's a little bit harder. The coatings are generally what's more than likely causing those dots on your lenses, which is why for our safety glasses that we have employees get through Mayo Clinic, is we don't offer any coatings. Because number one, they reduce for patients who work in laboratories and such, they reduce the corrosive resistance of the material by putting that coating over the front, but they also decrease the scratch resistance of the material, especially if you're doing something like looking through a microscope, which we see all the time. Those fresh marks from where you put your lenses on the microscope in the same place every single time. That's even happened with mine, talking about quality control. Anytime we get lenses in, we have to look through a lensometer, make sure that the prescription is matching up with our manufacturing standards. So I actually had a pair of lenses for a long time that I would use just for doing that, because I knew that over time I would get those same little spots on my lenses.
And scratches.
Exactly.
So how often are you sitting at a social gathering, a wedding, another family gathering, and you look across the room and someone's taking off their glasses and they're just polishing it in on
their
a
shirt.
Kleenex or their coat, and you're just going, no, that safety or that polish is going away.
People do it right in front of me when I'm helping them at the optical shop too, and they say, I know I shouldn't do this, but I'm doing it all the time. I tell patients too as a joke, it's not really a joke, but I can't watch the news anymore because every time I see somebody with crooked glasses on the news or in a movie, it drives me insane.
You can't take them seriously.
No, I'm like, with the amount of time that they look at preparing themselves for that, and your glasses are so crooked. Oh, all the time. I take my family's glasses and I'm fixing them up constantly.
I'm feeling slightly judged. Am I okay?
No, you both are good. I would have fixed it before we started if I would have noticed that.
Okay. That's funny.
I have one last one. Do you have another one? You want to go?
Yeah, go for it.
There's ongoing. You talk about tints and applications, and we continue to learn about whether it's the blue blocking or whether it's a tint, how patients are benefited by the things we do optically. NeuroLenses is sort of an emerging optical treatment or film that they're putting on glasses, and some providers feel they help headaches. Share with us. Just is that what is there much science behind NeuroLenses, and what is the optical community? What's the sense in dispensing those? As at least from a provider perspective, I don't really know where they fit, and there's not a lot of research that at least I'm aware of in which patients are benefited.
I'm kind of with you on the same boat for that. So I, again, kind of before in preparation for today, I've done a little bit more research on the NeuroLenses, and I've kind of come to the same conclusion as you. There are so many options that we have available for patients who suffer with migraines. I myself suffer with migraines. I've tried everything you can imagine. FL41, I've tried Avalux, if you've ever heard of Avalux before, anything you can imagine. And I hope that kind of with the myopia control lenses that we spoke about earlier, that the NeuroLens option, we get a little bit more information, a little bit more research about how it's helping patients. From what I saw, there aren't many downsides, at least from what they are reporting, in terms of patients who may notice adverse side effects because of those lenses, but it's still so new that I wouldn't be confident in saying one way or another.
Whether they help or not.
Exactly. Yeah. I still find that a tint is the most common way to go to reduce migraine symptoms. It's worked for me, and I've seen it just work so many times, and you all have prescribed them so many times that I just can't argue with it. But
I'll add in the tint category,
yeah,
from family members, polarized.
Yes.
It just seems like my patients have migraines in particular. A polarized lens can be an added meaningful improvement, addition to just the tint.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't recommend tinted lenses without polarization. Okay. There are very few situations where I would recommend it. Sometimes golfers, they notice that if they have a polarization filter on their lenses, it's harder for them to spot the golf ball as it's flying through the air. It's kind of a white ball on a light background, so it makes it a little bit harder because that polarization is blocking horizontal.
I would have never thought about that.
Now I have an excuse for my score.
I hear it all the time. And pilots are generally the other one where their windscreens that they have in their airplanes are generally already polarized. So if you put polarization over polarization, it can cause a blackout effect where it's hard for them to see their gauges and see what's in front of them. But other than that, I don't recommend sunglasses without a polarization filter, especially in a state like Minnesota where we have a lot of snow glare. When I lived in Arizona, you got a lot of reflection off of blacktop with the desert sun. So I would say 100% polarization is a great thing.
Great. My last question is just about looking forward. Like we're at the beginning of 2026. Yeah. So in the next year, what are you excited regarding innovations, technology? I know people are talking about the meta glasses. There's lots going on right now with glasses technology. So share with us your excitement.
Yeah, so I actually had to kind of look through all of the new technology to figure out which one was my favorite. This one took me a little bit of time. I really had to think about it. And what I have found is that what I'm most excited for are frames that are hopefully coming in the next year or two to be more widely available that integrate features for patients who struggle with hearing difficulties as well. So I've worked with closed captioning frames, if you've ever heard of those before, where they have a small insert that's placed inside of a frame, which actually provide closed captioning for somebody who may have hearing difficulties. But there are frames that actually integrate hearing aids inside of the frames, kind of like the meta glasses do with the cameras on the front, where they'll actually have an integrated hearing aid which can either be detached from the frame and placed in the ear, or have a speaker which can be directed towards the ear. Those, I think, are incredible. I think that it's going to do a lot, especially for our patients who wear hearing aids. It's a struggle sometimes for them with wearing eyeglasses, especially with when masks were generally worn by patients as well. You get too many things going on behind the ears, and it can cause a lot of pain for people. So that's the brunt of it. I'm super excited for the hearing aid integrated technology.
Cool. Well, as we all try to be a blessing, a positive feature in their patients' lives, or our patients' lives when they come to us and we're giving glasses, I just feel like your care is what would it be? It would be the bow on the present or the icing on the cake, that if you can't get the glasses right, it's just not going to, it'd be as special. And so I just thank you for your role here at Mayo, and through this podcast, just helping us all, tie that bow on their eye care experience through their glasses.
Thank you.
And appreciate your passion, joy, and expertise being shared with us.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to point out too, I completely agree with you on that. I tell anybody who will listen who works with eyeglasses that it doesn't matter how good of an exam a patient has, how good of a prescription was written. They can love their provider, they can love their technician. If they don't have good eyeglasses at the end, none of it matters. None of it matters. So I appreciate that you said that. I think about that every day when I come to work.
I couldn't be a surgeon without my glasses.
Yeah,
hey,
that's right.
So thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for your partnership and taking care of our patients.
Thank
and
you both.
Our
Without
mutual
you two,
patients.
they wouldn't need me. So
Thank you.
thank you.
You can find all episodes of the Mayo Clinic Ophthalmology podcast on our website, YouTube, or on most podcast platforms.
Thank you for listening, and we definitely look forward to sharing more on our next podcast.